What's happening, guys, and welcome back to another Sunday Scan. It was great to have Nate on last week and for him to be able to share his market thoughts and to kind of give the mid-year update on his goals and everything that he's been up to. So that was great to see him. And now we're back to the regular format that we've been doing, where I will run through a whole bunch of charts, just catch you up on what's been going on in the market over the last week. And then later on, I'm going to bring Judah on to go over some main watches and some market thoughts from really a swing trader's perspective, because this market has had a lot of breakouts, a lot of new highs, and someone like Judah, that's really where they thrive. And so just getting people on who are good at a particular style and to be able to have them share their thoughts is very valuable. So let's get right into it. Starting off with a couple things first. So one, Traders for a Cause was announced and the tickets are going on sale. Currently, the early bird tickets are available for Project Impact holders. And then the regular sale for everyone else, which will include some early bird tickets and some regular tickets, are all going on sale on Tuesday at noon. So I'm really looking forward to the event. Traders for a Cause is always something that everyone in the community really appreciates and they enjoy going to. And I've made a lot of great connections and met just some incredible people through events like that. So I highly encourage you to check it out. And those tickets will go on sale on Tuesday at noon. So let's get right into it. We had a very busy week in the market. We had several things happen with the Fed. We had data, we had earnings gaps, we had Apple announce that they're getting into AI. So let's just run through a whole bunch of charts and see what happened. Starting with SPX or SPY, and this really is just making new highs. It's having a great breakout. And what we really saw over the last couple of weeks is the transition from bond yields and rates really spiking to them sharply coming down, and the Fed and the data leading up to that really confirm that. And so you can really see that as yields come down, it really helps to push markets up. And you can see here the 10-year Treasury yield, or the bond yield, that has been trending down, and the Fed kind of confirmed that data is starting to come in softer now, and that just means that inflation was going up, then it was stalling, then it was going back up again, and now it's actually starting to come down. And that is exactly what the Fed was looking for in order for them to be able to do some rate cuts later this year. And so it's now a fine balance between, is the data, it's good that it's coming back down and inflation isn't as much of an issue, but why is it coming back down? And is that due to the economy slowing a bit? And so that's something to keep in the back of your mind, that yes, it's good that inflation's coming down, but the market can be bifurcated, as some industries are going to slow down, some cyclical ones, and while some other ones are going to continue to do well, or most likely continue to do well, the things like the NVIDIAs, the AI sector, and things that are kind of not as sensitive to rates. So a bunch of things were moving this week. We had Oracle had a big gap up after earnings. Just another one of the kind of the AI space, and we saw this with several names. We had names that have been gapping down and gapping up, and over the last week we had definitely more names gapping up. And so again, we have that initial move that kind of ramps up here, and then it starts to just consolidate. And so the real move comes, what happens after that consolidation period? Does it consolidate and ramp back up, and that continues the bullish trend? Or if it starts to weak and give that back, then we know that it was just kind of a news-driven event and it's going to go back to an equilibrium. Apple, they had their Apple, event telling people what they've been up to, releasing new products, new features, and they really emphasized kind of bringing AI into their products. And so the market had a very good reaction to that. And I think it had been waiting for it for a while, because, kind of the reputation that Apple's gotten over the last couple of years is they've been stagnant and like nothing exciting has been going on. And when you have all these other sectors and all these other companies like NVIDIA just, innovating and really rocking and just, doing everything right, something like Apple was not seen as quite as attractive as that. And so it's good to see Apple kind of putting their best foot forward and catching themselves up with the rest of the names by, really emphasizing the AI part of their business now. NVIDIA, again, they had their share split, and they have just been doing great afterwards. And we really didn't know. Sometimes after a company announces a stock split, sometimes that's like the euphoria or the capitulation, and all the shorts bail on it, all the longs get in, and then it starts to reverse. But so far, it just hasn't really happened. And I think that a lot of people who were in the retail space who kind of missed out on NVIDIA, now that the share price, the unit price of the share is seen as less expensive, even though on a relative basis it's exactly the same. Sometimes that can have a psychological effect and can encourage some buying, and it kind of like resets the perception of the stock for a while. And so again, that's just like a small part of one of the variables of why NVIDIA has moved so much over the last year, but that is something that took place over the last week. SMCI, this was an interesting one. We've been talking about this for a while, that it's had a lot of relative weakness compared to some of the other AI names, but that all changed on Thursday, and maybe it was just for one day, or maybe it's the start of a new trend, but you could really tell a difference in the action. And so you can see just this period of really downtrending and then being stuck in that channel that we've talked about on many of these names, where it's a consolidation period just within a range. And then once it started to act bullish above that range, and it was accompanied by some bullish option flow, then you could see that it started to have a nice move up. And we don't know, I'll get into it a little bit later with the main watches, but we don't know if it was because the market is kind of anticipating maybe a potential stock split with SMCI, or if it's because they were anticipating it getting added to the NASDAQ 100, and that didn't end up happening to them, at least not yet. It happened to ARM. And so it's just one to keep on watch to see if this was a one-day wonder, or if it's something that actually is the start of a trend change. Tesla. So Tesla had its compensation vote for Elon, huge $50 billion compensation package. And it was kind of like announced on X or Twitter during like the after hours period. So like people could see like the polls rolling in, like what was likely to happen. So it wasn't as much of a surprise, but it did gap up, and then it just kind of sold off and back to that mid-range. So there could be a pretty significant move coming on this one in the coming week or two. But it's nice to have that shareholder vote behind it, because that was a big deal, in my opinion, because I think that, regardless of what people think about Elon, I think that he wants to accumulate resources, and he wants to go and do his projects. He wants to do his space projects, his electric car projects, and the company that he uses to kind of fulfill that goal, I think it could change. So if he didn't get the compensation package from Tesla, I mean, he could take SpaceX public and just kind of use that as a vehicle to fund his ideas. So I think that it's good for Tesla shareholders that they did approve that, because I think that will keep his focus, or at least keep Elon using Tesla as that vehicle to do his other projects, as opposed to that taking a backseat and then him using another vehicle to do that. So we'll see. Avgo, this one had great earnings, and it also announced a split, a 10-for-1 split that will be coming up pretty soon. And it's just kind of following the same pattern as NVIDIA, bullish name in the AI sector, gapping up on good earnings, good forward guidance, and announcing a split. And we've just seen several of these names running just exactly like this. So this is another one that was moving this past week. Mara, we had some crypto pullbacks over the last week or so, and I think part of that was due to some dollar strength. There's some things happening in the Eurozone, kind of on a macro perspective, that are spilling over into the US a little bit, and that caused the dollar to go up, and that can cause some things like crypto to take a dip, at least for a while. So Mara was moving, but it had a decent range and some consolidation, but then it eventually had some nice flushes throughout the week. IREN, this is another kind of crypto name, and we've seen some bifurcation or some splitting between some of the larger, more established names like Mara and Riot, and those have gotten some short attention lately, and it kind of highlights the difficult business model of crypto mining. And so those names, the larger names, have been a little bit more heavy, and some of these smaller or upcoming names have been a little bit lighter. And so, we talked about relative strength and relative weakness in many sectors, but this was a great example where in the crypto sector, some of the small names were getting a lot more attention. They were getting some investment bank upgrades and some, praise there, but then the larger names were getting hit on the short side. So it's interesting to see how each of them are acting within the same sector. GME, the saga goes on, just wild stuff with Roaring Kitty and exercising the options and still having a position, and there's webinars, and there's all these things that are kind of happening around it. The thing that I'm really paying attention to is, you have these giant moves of just, these spikes, they raise money, they have more cash on hand, and then it kind of levels out until the next event. So, as that process is kind of unfolding, the company is building up a significant amount of cash. I mean, they have billions of dollars now. So I think this will continue to be in play, and this is just a name to watch in case you have any crazy headlines of, maybe they acquire another company, maybe they buy crypto, maybe they could do anything. And as long as there's range, as long as there's a loyal shareholder base, I think that kind of the cycle will go on of them causing it to spike, raising some money, causing it to flush, and then we'll see what happens. PDD, we talked about the China names over the last month or 2 months, and China's just a difficult economy still. And PDD has held up pretty well compared to some of the other ones like Baba. And you can just see that these had a nice move up over the last, couple of months, and it just gave it all back a round trip. So again, kind of highlighting that relative strength versus relative weakness. And you can just see how even companies who are reporting good results, if they're in a difficult enough environment, they can just kind of stagnate, while some of the names that are struggling are getting hammered a little bit more. So that's something that was in play over the last week or two. AFRM, they announced that they're doing some stuff with Apple recently, but then they kind of came out and said that it's not going to impact their financials too much, at least not this year, maybe towards the end of next year or so. So this had a really nice move on the way up. And then these are the kinds of plays that I actually like a lot. It's kind of in the price range. You can see that initial volume move, that capitulation, and then, that swipe test that we talk about, and then a clean backside move once the reality of the news kind of set in. And these are the moves that I like to really play with puts, where you have, kind of a clean front side, a failed follow through, a swipe test, and then the backside of the move there. So that's something that I was trading and something that was in play over the last week. ZAPP, this is another one that I traded as well. And so this one had a big gap up, and it was a little bit unique because this had very tight circuit bands on it. And so circuit bands, they're basically when does a stock halt? How far does a stock have to move to halt? And that depends. If a stock closes below, 70 or 75 cents, I forget which one it is, but it has much tighter circuit bands from the day before. And so the circuit bands are based on the prior day's close, and so if it's below that 70 or 75 level, then the circuit bands are very tight. So that means that even small moves can cause it to halt up or down. And then if it's a higher share price, then it takes more for those circuit bands to really kick in. But what we had here is a large ramp up, and then you just had it halting all day long, and you actually had a nice move on, I believe it was Thursday, where you had that initial move up, then it kind of consolidated throughout the day, and then it was not really breaking down. It was holding under, these key levels. And then as it started to kind of grind back up towards the end of the day, from the low to the high, basically a 50% move. And so these are some to really pay attention to, of kind of like an intraday, like a version of a liquidity trap where the circuit bands can actually restrict the liquidity and make it hard for people to get in and out. And so as they ramp up throughout the day, you can have a kind of a blow off move there. And then kind of a bigger picture, you could potentially have another liquidity trap setting up on a longer time frame, where if it's holding these levels down here and it's still not breaking down, then maybe we get a more normal liquidity trap, but it won't have the tight circuit bands anymore. So it's a different style of play. KAVL, another one that was in play this week, and you can kind of see a similar pattern where, gapped up, held some of these levels, did the trap, dipped, and then squeezed out again. And again, these are pretty significant moves from, call it the 450 area all the way up to 9 again. So there's been some good range on gappers, and there's been lots of traps laid on the short side. So just something to keep in mind, that if you have a big gap up, you have something start to come in, and then it starts to reverse, grind higher, and move towards the highs, you could have a significant squeeze out. And LGVN, this had a price target increase. And so this was another one that's in play, and we've seen many charts that look like this, where it's just kind of holding these higher lows, and until you kind of have like a blow-off move or a big failed follow-through and a crack, you can kind of just assume that it's going to hold these higher lows until you get one of those two things. Okay, and then for the next section of Scan, I'm going to announce the t-shirt winners, and these were people who left good comments in the comment section. And so we had Gabino725, congrats, you have won a t-shirt. And then Pratik Jin, you have also won a t-shirt. So congratulations to you both, and you can email webmaster@investorsunderground.com to claim those shirts. And now we're going to bring on Judah to go over his main watches. But before I do that, I have to give a disclaimer that neither Judah nor I are financial advisors, and these are not buy or sell recommendations. And these conversations are really for informational and educational purposes only. So let's bring on Judah. All right, guys, we got Judah on. Judah, it's been a couple of weeks. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, doing well. Crazy market, lots of breakouts working. I wanted to get a good breakout trader, a swing trader, someone who is familiar with what's been happening in the market. So what have you been noticing, and what's been working kind of on the swing side of things?
Yeah, so I mean, with the markets hitting highs, and especially the 3 days ago, it kind of broke up out of this this little base that we had here, and we see this with all these names now. This little move out of SMCI. AMD was one that was showing a little bit of relative weakness, but now it's starting to kind of tighten up here. Then we have Nvidia, which had the stock split and just kept on grinding higher from there. So I mean, these things continue to lead the market. We've also had these gap ups off earnings or news, and continuations, cores. We had Chewy, which was a gap up here, and then a little bit of a grind, which was very similar to the AI move, which reclaimed that started off weak, reclaimed, and then it just over the past week it just continues to grind higher. And then we have the breakouts like Reddit, on this day here, then it continues, as well as those crypto names, the smaller ones like WLF, which was coming out of this. If you go to the weekly, you could see like this this flag and this tightness it gets, and then we break out here, and it kind of detaches from the other ones like Mara and CLSK, and then IREN is the other one, which broke out and then came down pretty hard, but then the next day it holds that 8 and then reclaims, and I mean almost doubles from there. So I mean, it's really things like that. We have ASTS on news, continuation play from this day here, and it's just really the names that are kind of breaking out of these ranges or gapping up and holding, they're working. I mean, anything that's really gapping up and holding that move is one that continues higher. And I mean, that's pretty much where the focus is, and it's less so on the liquidity traps at this point for me. It's more like I'm trying to focus more on these, but there is going to be a liquidity trap that I do go over in a scan for next week. BNAI was one actually, I believe last week or 2 weeks ago. On this day here, it was on scans as well. It's just I'm trying to really limit the amount of liquidity traps I have, because there's so many small caps moving, and you could have a bunch of names that die off with volume. A lot of them just continue to go lower, and some of them just have much higher moves to the upside. So BNAI was another one back here that had a good liquidity trap. I mean, just a familiar daily, something that I've seen in the past. One of these plays where it just sells off and then just kind of does this, but this is just something that I was familiar with, and it did have that liquidity trap set up. So, I mean, a lot of things are working as the market's hitting highs.
Excellent. Yeah, and like you're saying, depending on how the market is, that it makes sense to focus on some areas rather than others. So for example, like if you're talking about some of the small names, the crypto names, if they're gapping up, if they're holding, like that's kind of a unique thing and that's not happening all the time. Whereas liquidity traps, they're usually pretty, they're around pretty frequently. And so if you have something with good range, it's holding good upside, and you can get a nice swing trade on it, then it makes, like you're saying, it makes a lot of sense to kind of focus there rather than just always treating your setups the exact same instead of leaning into some that are working exceptionally well. So that's
Hmm.
good.
Yep.
Um, yeah, and then what do you have on watch for the upcoming week? What are your what couple of watches do you have?
Yeah. So NNE is one that I'm watching for tomorrow. Generally, something like this would be on watch from last night, and today would be day one. But looking at this daily, the recent IPO of it and the move that it's made recently, I think that if these dips hold and if 850 could hold, I think we could continue to move higher. Maybe we get to like the 12-14 area if we do push over the next few days. This is a little bit of a wider name. It's like a sometimes you'll see it's like 10-20 cent spread, but when the volume comes in like it did here, it's a little bit easier to trade. And today was day one, but if we could get some entries and it holds some levels, then I'll look to take that for some continuation. And then there's this sector that's been kind of moving lately and getting some attention, which is the bird flu sector. And I don't really know too much about what's going on in that. In that there are mixed reviews about what's going on with the bird flu. People are dying from bird flu. People are dying that they have bird flu, but it's not what caused their death. And I'm not sure exactly what it is, but all I know is that there is volume in these names and they are moving. So ISPC was one that is kind of trying to move out of this, this little bit of a range here and kind of hit alerts today. But this is something that could continue or possibly gap up on Monday with the rest. VRAX is another one which had an overnight gap here, pretty much doubled overnight, and now we're trying to curl out of this daily there. So this is another one that I'll be on watch with ISPC, and then the last one in that basket that I have is this AEMD, um, which is pretty much holding up here, and it's gap down. It has some gap fills, to actually fill, and I think if those all continue, we could probably, maybe get back to that $98 level here. So like these three are pretty much on watch with that basket for the bird flu. And then we have a larger cap name, a little slower, which is PLTR, which is just, kind of holding ranges like this whole thing over the past, 8 months didn't really do much. And then we have a nice gap up, I believe, off earnings here. And now we're just still holding that range. So, if we could kind of break this range here, then I'll look to take that on the long side. Then we have GME, which over the past few days, there's been a few things out. Roaring Kitty unloaded his options and put 4 million shares added 4 million shares into his positions. Now I believe he's holding around 9 million shares, and it's still holding up. It hasn't sold off. I believe today is Friday. There's conference out today, so we'll see how that ends off. But if this could kind of reclaim this 30 level, I don't see why this can't continue. I mean, it should be breaking down if it's not going to continue a little higher. So this is on watch over that 30 level for some continuation. And then we got this liquidity trap I was talking about earlier, ZAPP, which had a pretty big move from 80 cents up to 3, and now it's just kind of holding that midpoint there. And if we could kind of get any trend, really, that's how it works for me with liquidity traps. Is any trend, I'll look to take that, and then I'll just sell along. I guess usually it's key levels, but this is a little bit of a weirder chart. So I guess as it fails, and that will be more like as it happens kind of thing. But this will be on liquidity trap watch, and that's pretty much what I got for next week.
Awesome. And while you have ZAPP up there, if you could zoom in a little bit to get like a more a view of like the intraday, I was trading this one last week, and this is one that had really tight circuit bands on it because if it opens below, a certain price, then it's the halts can happen much more frequently. And I had a nice trade on this one as it after it ramped up, it looked like it was doing a failed follow through, and then it kind of consolidated back, and it ended up squeezing out into the end of the day. Yeah, and I believe it was on Thursday. And so, just kind of like a recap with some of these plays, it's kind of like an intraday liquidity trap, and it's not so much liquidity in the fact that like the liquidity dries up, but it's more that these names they're low floats, they have a huge gap up, and so it's on everyone's radar to short it. And so you have it constantly halting, down, up, and that can kind of mess with the liquidity there. And so you get like a version of a liquidity trap happening all in one day. And so if you have these names that have a huge gap up, they're a low float, they have a good amount of volume and float rotation, and they have those tight circuit bands on them, if they're not breaking down into the end of the day and they start to come back up, you likely have a lot of people who don't have the liquidity that the volume says that they should have because of the circuit bands. And so you can get some really nice moves on the way back up with that. And I think Nate was trading that one as well. So as long as they're holding key levels and they start to kind of grind back, those can be ones that have a nice, 30, 40, 50% move into the close. But onto my main watches. And just before I get to those, one last thing with GME, because you mentioned that one too, Judah.
Yep.
And, over the course of this whole crazy GameStop thing, they've raised a lot of money. And I think that that's worth noting because, these names start off as like, okay, it's kind of a beaten down company, no real fundamentals. But if you were to look at how much money they've raised and they're still above kind of where it started at, it's like instead of selling a product and making, millions or billions of dollars, they're selling shares from, the hype, and they're making billions of dollars that way. And so even though, the company's business itself might not be too interesting, if you have a company that is able to raise billions of dollars, and if you have some people who know what they're doing behind the wheel with the Ryan Cohen guy, who knows? I like Nate would say, have an imagination because if you have these people who kind of understand the meme cycle, and if they understand some things about business and they've been able to raise a bunch of money, I mean, they have close to $4 billion now just sitting in their treasury, and they can do a lot with that. So I would say that, if they do something smart with the money, this could really open up again. But if they just continue to dilute and don't do anything with the money, then obviously we would head back down, or it would maybe trade at a level more towards like what their cash value per share is.
Yeah,
But
like there's like acquisition that they could either do, pivotal change within their own company, or they could do something more like acquisitional and just start acquiring companies, even if they're like small startups, and just have like be a shell technically that's just like acquiring a bunch of different companies and growing that way. So
exactly, yeah, almost like a SPAC or something. I
yeah,
mean, yeah, there's multiple ways a company can grow. They can improve their operations, they can pay down debt, they can acquire other businesses. So they have the fuel to do that if they want to. So that's a great thought. Okay, so on to a couple of my main watches. I'm going to be watching ARM this upcoming week. This name was it's been after it had a pretty sharp sell-off, and it almost looked like the insiders were dumping, and maybe they were dumping shares a month ago or so, but it's really had a nice comeback. And so whether that's the insiders stopped selling, or a new trend took place, this has been ramping back up to highs and actually just touched the previous highs from the former capitulation level. And this name was also added to the NASDAQ 100. And so this is definitely on watch for some continuation, as long as, again, the insiders don't start offloading shares again at a certain level. But I think that this has a good chance to keep going. So ARM is on watch for me for the upcoming week, and I would use probably calls to play something like this. Okay, the next one that we have on watch is Citibank, and I'm watching most financials, but I'm watching Citibank in particular. There's a couple of reasons for this. Some of the financials have had some relative weakness recently, and there's also something that's not really being talked about too much, but there's been elections in Europe that have been happening, and there's things in France where you have more of like a right-leaning shift towards some of the politicians. And what that could potentially mean is that some of these Euro countries could potentially over the next several months or several months or a year could potentially have some kind of like a Brexit type of moment in there where some of these countries might no longer want to be in the EU. And so it's not being talked about a whole lot, but it is on my radar. And the reason I mention that is because that can cause a lot of banking stress if you have an entire country who has a huge economic shakeup. And so you can have banks in Europe getting very stressed, and that can spill over into some of the banks in the US who have a lot of international ties. And so it's not something I'm saying is happening, for sure, but it's something that's on my radar. And if we get some turmoil in Europe due to some of those election shakeups, then I think that banking will be a sector that is hit on that, and it could spill over into the U.S. banks as well. So I have Citi on watch for possible puts if that kind of narrative escalates at all. And then for the next one, I have Tesla. They had the compensation vote for Elon, and it passed. I was expecting the timing of this was a little bit strange because they kind of announced the results like the night before, saying it looked like it was going to pass, and so you didn't really get like an intraday setup on it. But it had a big gap up on it, and then it kind of just settled back in. And I think that it's going to have probably a 10-point move in either direction. I'm not sure which one, but I do think that this news is significant, and it's either going to keep going back up once like the options and everything kind of reset from this week, or if it's having such relative weakness that even something that was supposed to be good news was not treated as good news, then we could have a nice flush down. So I don't really have a bias on this, but I do think that it is going to have upcoming range. And then on to the next one, we have SMCI. So this was an interesting one. I traded this week with calls on, I believe it was Wednesday or Thursday. It was acting a lot different. We've talked about SMCI having a lot of relative weakness over the last month or so, and it started to change character. It started to have bullish option flows come into it. It started to hold every single dip, and it had a nice day of about 10% up or so. And I thought that could potentially be the market anticipating a split coming up. And I think that that's still possible, but I also think that it could have been anticipating SMCI possibly getting added to that NASDAQ 100 index, and then ARM ended up being the one that got added into it. And so if that's kind of the move that it was anticipating, then I think that you could have a nice unwind from that. But if the move up was from a possible split happening soon, then maybe it'll stay bid. But that one's definitely on watch. And then DJT, so they had a filing saying that they can sell, a bunch of insider shares. And, we'll see. This is one that's very headline driven, but I think that if any insiders start selling, this can just have a huge amount of pressure, come onto it. And I think it can really have a hard flush. And it's really decoupled from things like RDDT, like we've had on watch. And those were kind of trading in tandem in some ways when they first IPO'd and everything. Or started trading as their own entities in the case of DJT, but this one is starting to decouple, and this would be on watch for puts, especially if we get any steady selling pressure. And then I believe that was it. Was that the last one, Judah?
That was the last one.
All right, great. Yeah, so those are my main watches for the week. And Judah, thank you for sharing yours. And just a reminder to everyone, the Traders for a Cause tickets are going on sale. The early bird specials are going on right now for the Project Impact people. And then on Tuesday at noon, you will have the rest of the early bird tickets and all the main tickets go on sale. And so people can snag their tickets for Traders for a Cause this year. So Judah, thank you for joining me on this. It was great to catch up with you.
You too.
All right, see you.